Hello, welcome to Goodnight Flagstaff. I'm Tom Verstraete. My wife and I read for our granddaughter's first grade class as mystery readers, and we liked that so much we decided to start reading for Goodnight Flagstaff. Thank you for tuning in to our community story time. You can find a new chapter from one of our family-friendly books at 8 p.m. each weeknight on the Literacy Center's YouTube channel and on Crater Radio, a local online radio station. The previous chapter is replayed on Crater Radio each weeknight at about 7:30, just before the new chapter airs. You can also listen to all previous Goodnight Flagstaff recordings on YouTube. We are currently reading Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. If you'd like to check out and read along with us at home, it's available at the library. Check one out today with your Coconino library card. Please email us if you'd like to join our team of readers and connect with your community through stories. All ages welcome. Our email is goodnightflagstaff@gmail.com. The last time we read together, Faramir and his company were overrun with the help of Gandalf returned to Gondor wounded. But then Lord Denethor lost his mind and ordered Faramir to be burned alive with him and stopped caring about the defense of the city. Pippin ran to find Gandalf to stop Lord Denethor. But when he found him, the enemy was breaking down the gate, and he was facing the Lord of the Nazgul. Even so, horns were heard in the distance. Rohan had finally come. Chapter 5. The Ride of the Rohirrim. It was dark, and Merry could see nothing as he lay on the ground rolled in a blanket. Yet through the night, though the night was airless and windless, all about him hidden trees were sighing softly. He lifted his head. Then he heard it again, a sound like faint drums in the wooded hills and mountain steppes. The throb would cease suddenly, then be taken up again at some point, now nearer, now farther off. He wondered if the watchmen had heard it. He could not see them, but he knew that all around him were the companies of Rohirrim. He could smell the horses in the dark, and he could hear their shiftings and their soft stamping on the needle-covered ground. The host was bivouacked in the pine woods that was clustered about the Ilanek Beacon, a tall hill standing up from the long ridges of the Druden forest that lay behind the great road in East Anorain. Tired as he was, Merry could not sleep. He had ridden now for 4 days on end, and the ever-deepening gloom had slowly weighed down his heart. He began to wonder why he had been so eager to come, and when he had been given every excuse, even his lord's command to stay behind. He wondered, too, if the old king knew that he had been disobeyed and was angry. Perhaps not. There seemed to be some understanding between Durham and Elfhelm, the marshal who had commanded the Eornord which they were riding. He and all his men ignored Merry and pretended not to hear if he spoke. He might have been just on their bag that the Durnhelm was carrying. Durnhelm was in comfort. He never spoke to anyone. Merry felt small, unwanted, and lonely. Now the time was anxious, and the host was in peril. They were less than a day's ride from the outwalls of Minas Tirith that encircled the townlands. Scouts had been sent out. Some had not returned. Others hastened back and reported that the road was held in force against them. The host of the enemy was encamped upon it, 3 miles west of Amundine, and some strength of men was already thrusting along the road, and was no more than 3 leagues away. Orcs were roving in the hills and the woods along the roadside. The king and Eomer held council in the watches of the night. Merry wanted somebody to talk to, and he thought of Pippin. But that only increased his restlessness. Poor Pippin, shut up in the great city of stone, lonely and afraid. Merry wished he was a tall rider like Eomer and could blow a horn or something and go galloping to his rescue. He sat up, listening to the drums that were beating again, now nearer at hand. Presently he heard voices speaking low. He saw the dim, half-shrouded lanterns pass through the trees. Men nearby began to move uncertainly in the dark. A tall figure loomed up and stumbled over him, cursing the tree roots. He recognized the voice of the marshal Elfhelm. "I'm not a tree root, sir," he said, "nor a bag, but a bruised hobbit, and the least you could do in amends is to tell me what is afoot." "Anything that I can keep so in this devil's murk," answered the Elfhelm, "but my lord sends words that we must set ourselves in readiness. Orders may come for a sudden move." "Is the enemy coming then?" asked Mary anxiously. "Are those their drums? I begin to think I was imagining them, as no one else seemed to take notice of them." "Nay, nay," said Elfhelm. "The enemy is on the road, not in the hills. You hear the wozes, the wild men of the woods. Thus they talk together from afar. They still haunt Druiden Forest, it is said. Remnants of the older time they be, living few and secretly, wild and wary as the beast. They go not to war with Gondor or the Mark, but now they are troubled by the darkness and the coming of the orcs. They fear lest the dark years be returning, as seems likely enough. Let us be thankful that they are not hunting us, for they use poisoned arrows, it is said, and they are woodcrafty beyond compare. But they have offered their services to Theoden. Even now one of their headmen is being taken to the king. Yonder go the lights. So much I have heard, but no more. And now I must busy myself with my lord's commands. Pack yourself up, Master Bag." And he vanished into the shadows. Mary did not like this talk of wild men and poisoned darts. But quite apart from the great weight of dread that was on him, waiting was unbearable. He longed to know what was going to happen. He got up and was soon walking warily in pursuit of the last lantern before it disappeared among the trees. Presently he came to an open space where a small tent had been set up for the king under a great tree. A large lantern, covered above, was hanging from a bough, and cast a pale circle of light below. There sat Theoden, Eomer, and before them on the ground sat a strange squat shape of a man, gnarled as an old stone, and the hairs of his scanty beard scrabbled on his lumpy chin and like dry moss. He was short-legged and fat-armed, thick and stumpy, and clad only with grass about his waist. Mary felt that he had seen him before somewhere, and suddenly he remembered. The Pukel men of Dunarrow. Here was one of these old images brought to life, and maybe a creature descended in true line through the endless years from models used by the forgotten craftsmen long ago. There was a silence as Mary crept nearer, and then the wild man began to speak, in answer to some question, it seemed. His voice was deep and guttural, and yet to Mary's surprise he spoke the common speech, though in halting fashion, and uncouth words were mingled with it. "No father of horsemen," he said. "We fight not, hunt only, kill Gorgon in the woods, hate orc folk. You hate Gorgon too. We help as we can. Wild men have long ears and eyes, know all paths. Wild men live here before stone houses, before tall men come up out of the water. But our need is for aid in battle," said Eomer. "How will you and your folk help us?" "Bring news," said the wild man. "We look out from the hills. We climb the big mountain and look down. Stone City is shut. Fires burn there outside, now inside too. You wish to come there? Then you must be quick. But Gorgon and men out of far away." He waved a short gnarled arm eastward. "Sit on Horse Road. Very many, more than horsemen." "How do you know that?" said Eomer. The old man's face and dark eyes showed nothing, but his voice was sullen with displeasure. "Wild men are wild, free, but not children," he answered. "I'm a great headman. Gonbury gone. I count many things. Stars in the sky, leaves on the trees, men in the dark. You have a score of scores, counted 10 times in 5. They have more. Big fight. Who will win? And many more walk around the walls of stone houses." "Alas, he speaks too shrewdly," said Theoden, "and our scouts say they have cast trenches and stakes across the road. We cannot keep them away in a sudden onset. And yet we need great haste, said Eomer. Mundburg is on fire. Let Gonbury Gon finish, said the wild man. More than one road he knows. He will lead you by road where no pits, no Gorgon walk, only wild men and beasts. Many paths were made when the Stonehouse folks were stronger. They carved the hills as hunters, carved the beast flesh. Wild men think they ate some stone for food. They went through Druiden to Rimmon with great wains. They go no longer. Road is forgotten, but not by the wild men. Over hill and beyond hill it lies still under grass and trees. There behind the Ramon and down to the Dean, and back into the end to the horseman's road. Wild men will show you that road. Then you will kill Gorgon and drive away bad dark with bright iron. The wild men can go back to sleep in the wild woods. Eomer and the king spoke together in their own tongue. At length Theoden turned to the wild men. We will receive your offer, he said. For though we leave a host of foes behind, what matter? If the stone city falls, then we shall have no returning. If it is saved, then the Orc host itself will be cut off. If you are faithful, Gonbury Gon, then we will give you a rich reward. You shall have the friendship of the Mart forever. Dead men are not friends to living men, and give them no gifts, said the wild man. But if you live after the darkness, then leave the wild man alone in the woods, and do not hunt them like beasts any more. Gonbury Gon will not lead you into a trap. He will go himself with father of the horsemen, and if he leads you wrong, you will kill him. So be it, said Theoden. How long will it take to pass the enemy and come back to the road, said Eomer. We must go at foot pace if you guide us, and I doubt not the way is narrow. Wild men go quick on feet, said Gon. Way is wide for 4 horses in Stonewain Valley yonder. He waved his hand southward, but narrow at beginning and end. Wild man could walk from here to Dean between sunrise and noon. Then we must allow at least 7 hours for the leaders, said Eomer. But we must reckon rather on some 10 hours for all. Things unforeseen may hinder us. And if our host is still strung out, it will be long ere it can be set in order when we issue from the hills. What is the hour now? Who knows, said Theoden. All is night now. If it is all dark, but it is not night at all, said Gon. When sun comes, we feel her, even when she is hidden. Already she climbs over the east mountains. It is the opening of day in the sky fields. Then we must set out as soon as May, said Eomer. Even so, we cannot hope to come to Gondor's aid today. Merry waited to hear more, but slipped away to get ready for the summons to march. This was the last stage before the battle. It did not seem likely to him that many of them would survive it, but he thought of Pippin and the flames at Minas Tirith and thrust down his own dread. All went well that day, and no sight or sound had they of the enemy waiting to waylay them. The wild men had put out a screen of wary hunters, so that no orc or roving spy should learn of the movements in the hills. The light was more dim than ever as they drew nearer to the beleaguered city, and the riders passed in long files like dark shadows of men and horses. Each company was guided by a wild woodman, but old Gon walked beside the king. The start had been slower than was hoped for, and it had taken time for the riders, walking and leading the horses, to find the paths over the thickly wooded ridges behind their camp and down into the hidden Stonewain Valley. It was late in the afternoon when the leaders came to the wide gray thicket stretching beyond the eastward side of Amundine, and masking a great gap in the line of hills that from Nardole to Dean ran east and west. Through the gap of the forgotten Wain road long ago had run down, back into the main horseway from the city, through Anarain, But now, for many lives of men, trees had had their way with it, and it had vanished, broken and buried under the leaves of uncounted years. But the thickets offered the riders their last hope of cover before they went into the open for battle. For beyond them lay the road and the plains of Andean, while east and southward the slopes were bare and rocky, as writhen hills gathered themselves together and climbed up, bastion upon bastion, into the great mass of shoulders of Mendelian. The leading company was halted, and those behind filled up and out the trough of the Stone Valley. They spread out and passed to camping places under the gray trees. The king summoned the captains to council. Eomer sent out scouts to spy upon the roads, but old Gan shook his head. No good to send horsemen, he said. Wild men have already seen all that can be seen in the bad air. They will come soon and speak to me here. The captains came, and then out of the trees crept warily other pupil shapes, so like old Gan that Mary could hardly tell them apart. They spoke to Gan, and in their strange throaty language. Presently Gan tuned to the king. Wild men say many things, he said. First, be wary. Still many men encamp beyond Dean. An hour's walk beyond yonder. He waved his arm westward towards the black beacon. But none to see between here and Stone Folk's new walls. Many busy there. Walls stand up no longer. Gorgon knocked them down with earth thunder and with clubs of black iron. They are unweary and do not look about them. They think their friends watch all roads. At that, Gan made a curious gurgling noise, and it seemed that he was laughing. Good tidings, cried Eomer. Even in this gloom, hope gleams again. Our enemy's devices off service in his despite. The accursed darkness itself has been a cloak to us, and now, lusting to destroy Gondor and throw it down stone from stone, his orcs have taken away my greatest fear. The outwall could have been held long against us. Now we can sweep through, if once we win so far. Once again I thank you, Gonbury Gan of the woods, said Theoden. Good fortune go with you and tidings for your guidance. Kill Gorgon, kill orc folk. No other words please wild men. Drive away bad air and darkness with bright iron. To do these things we have ridden far, said the king, and we shall attempt them. But what shall we achieve only tomorrow will show. Gonbury Gan squatted down and touched the earth with his horny brow in token of farewell. Then he got up as if to depart. But suddenly he stood looking up like some startled woodland animal snuffing a strange air, and a light came to his eyes. Wind is changing, he cried, and with that, in a twinkling, as it seemed, he and his fellows had vanished into the glooms, never to be seen by any rider of Rohan again. Not long after, far away eastward, and the faint drums throbbed again. Yet to no heart in all the host came any fear that the wild men were unfaithful, strange and unlovely though they might appear. We need no further guidance, said Elfhelm, for there are riders in the host who have ridden down to Mundburg in the days of peace. I, for one. When we come to the road, it will veer south. There will lie before us still 7 leagues ere we reach the wall of the townlands. Along most of what lay there is much grass on either side of the road. On that stretch, the errand riders of Gondor reckon to make their greatest speed. We may ride it swiftly and without great rumor. Then, since we must look for fell deeds and the need of all our strength, said Eomer, I counsel that we rest now and set out hence by night, and so time our going so that we come upon the fields when tomorrow is as light as it will be, or when our Lord gives the signal. To this the king assented, and the captains departed. But soon Elfhelm returned. The scouts have found naught to report beyond the grey wood, Lord. He said, save only 2 men, 2 dead men and 2 dead horses. Well, said Eomer, what of it? This lord, they were errand riders of Gondor. Hirgon was one, maybe. At least his hand still clasped the red arrow, but his head was hewn off, and this also. It would seem by the signs that they were fleeing westward when they fell. As I read it, they found the enemy already on the outwall or assailing it, and when they returned, and that would be 2 nights ago, if they had used fresh horses from the post as their wont, they could not reach the city and turn back. Alas, said Theoden, then Denethor has heard no news of our riding and will despair of our coming. Need brooks no delay, yet late is better than never, said Eomer. And mayhap is the time shall the old saw be proved truer than ever before, since these men spoke with mouth. It was night. On either side of the road, the host of Rohan was moving silently. Now the road passed about the skirts of Mendelian and turned south. Far away and almost straight ahead was the red glow under the black sky, and the sides of the great mountain loomed dark against it. They were drawing near the Ramas of the Pelennor, but the day was not yet come. The king rode in the midst of the leading company, his household men about him. Elfhelm's Inorn came next, and now Merry noticed that Nirnhelm had left his place in the darkness and was moving steadily forward, until at last he was riding just in the rear of his king's guard. There came a check. Merry heard voices in the front. Outriders had come back, who had ventured forward almost to the wall. They came to the king. There are great fires, lord, said one. The city is all set about with flame. The field is full of foes. But all of them seem drawn off to the assault. As well we could guess, there are few left upon the outwall. They are heedless and busy in destruction. Do you remember the wild man's words, lord, said the other? I live upon the open wold in days of peace. Windfar is my name, and to me also the air brings messages. Already the wind is turning. There comes a breath of the south. There's a sea tang in it. Faint though it may be, this morning will bring new things. Above the reek it will be dawn when you pass the wall. If you speak truly, Windfara, then may you live beyond this day in years of blessedness, said Theoden. He turned to his men and his household who were near, and he spoke in a clear voice that so many also of the riders of the first Eredor heard him. Now is the hour come. Riders of the mark, sons of Elor, foes and fires are before you, and your homes far behind you. Yet though you fight upon the alien field, the glory that you reap there shall be your own forever. Oaths ye have taken, now fulfill them all, to lord and land in league of friendship. Men clashed spear upon shield. Elromor, my son, you lead the first Elrod, said Theoden, and it shall go behind the king's banner in the center. Elfhelm, lead your company to the right, and when we pass the wall, the Grimbold shall lead towards the left. Let the other companies behind follow. These 3 that lead, as they have chance, strike wherever the enemy gathers. Other plans we cannot make, for we cannot know yet how things stand upon the field. Forth now, and fear no darkness. The leading company took off as swiftly as they could, for it was still deep dark. Whatever change Windfara might forebode, Merry was riding behind Durnelm, clutching with the left hand, while the other he tried to loosen the sword in its sheath. He felt how now bitterly the truth of the old king's words. In such a battle that would do you, Meriadoc, just this, he thought. Encumber a rider and hope at best to stay in my seat and not be pounded to death by galloping hoofs. It was no more than a league to where the outwalls had stood. They soon reached him, too soon for Merry. Wild cries broke out, and there was some clash of arms, but it was brief. The orcs busy about the walls were few and amazed, and they were quickly slain or driven off. Before the ruin of the north gate, in the Ramas, the king halted again. The first Ered drew up behind him on either side. Durnhelm held close to the king. Though Elfhelm's company was away to the right, Grimbold's men turned aside and passed around to a great gap in the wall further eastward. Merry peered from behind Durnhelm's back. Far away, maybe 10 miles or more, there was a great burning, but between it and the riders, lines of fire blazed in a vast crescent. It was the nearest point less than a league distance. He could make out little more on the dark plain, and as yet he neither saw any hope of the morning nor felt any wind, changed or unchanged. Now silently the host of Rohan moved forward into the field of Gondor, pouring in slowly but steadily like the rising tide through the breaches of a dike that men have thought secure. But the mind and the will of the Black Captain were bent wholly on falling the city, and as yet no tidings came to warn him that his designs held any flaw. After a while the king led his men away somewhat eastward to come between the fires of the siege and the outer fields. Still they were unchallenged, and still Theoden gave no signal. At last he halted once again. The city was now nearer. The smell of burning was in the air, and a very shadow of death. The horses were uneasy, but the king sat upon Snowmane, motionless, gazing upon the agony of Minas Tirith. As if stricken suddenly by anguish or by dread, he seemed to shrink down, cowed by age. Merry himself felt as if the great weight of horror and doubt had settled on him. His heart beat slowly. Time seemed poised in uncertainty. They were too late. Too late. This is worse than never. Perhaps Theoden would quail, bow his old head, and turn and slink away and hide in the hills. Then suddenly Merry felt it at last, beyond doubt, a change. Wind was in his face. Light was glimmering. Far away in the south the clouds could be dimly seen as remote gray shapes rolling up and drifting morning lay upon them. But at that same moment there was a flash, as if the lightning had sprung from the earth beneath the city. For a searing second it stood dazzling far off in black and white, its utmost tower a glittering needle. And then as the darkness closed again, there came a rolling over the fields, a great boom. At the sound, the bent shape of the king sprang suddenly erect. Tall and proud he seemed again, and rising in his stirrups, he cried in a loud voice, more clear than any there had ever heard a mortal man achieve before. Arise, arise, riders of Theoden. Fell deeds awake, fire and slaughter. Spear shall be shaken, shield shall be splintered. A sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride, now ride, ride to Gondor. With that he seized the great horn of Gulflath and his banner bearer, and he blew such a blast that it burst asunder. And straightway all the horns in the host were lifted up in music, and the blowing of the horns of Rohan in that hour was like a storm upon the plain, and thunder in the mountains. Ride, now ride, ride to Gondor. Suddenly the king cried to Snowmane, and the horse sprang away. Behind him and his banner blew in the wind, white horse upon the field of green. He outpaced it. After him thundered the knights of his house, but he was ever before them. Eomer rode there, the white horsetail on his helm floating in his speed. In the front of the first J.R.R. roared like a breaker foaming on the shore, but Theoden could not be overtaken. Fey he seemed, or the battle fury of his fathers ran like new fire in his veins, and he was borne up on Snowmane like a god of old, even as Orome the Great in the battle of Valar. When the world was young. His golden shield was uncovered, and lo, it shone like an image of the sun, and the grass flamed to green about the white feet of his steed. For morning came, morning in the wind of the sea, and darkness was removed. The host of Mordor wailed, and terror took them. They fled and died. The hooves of wrath rode over them. And then all of the host of Rohan burst into song. They sang and they slew, for the joy of battle was on them, and the sound of their singing, that was fair and terrible, came even to this city. Thank you for tuning in. Join us next time for Chapter 6 in Book 5 of Return of the King. Goodnight, Flagstaff.